My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and my parents actually laughed in my face when I told them I was marrying a security guard. My brother sneered. My sister rolled her eyes, and none of them agreed to come to the wedding. I walked down the aisle as a bride completely alone. But when our private ceremony suddenly appeared live on national television, my phone froze from the hundreds of missed calls and desperate texts. They had no idea that the man they mocked was about to turn their entire world upside down. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The nightmare started at Le Soleil, an ultra-exclusive Michelin star restaurant in downtown Manhattan. The crystal chandeliers cast a cold light over our private dining table. I sat there in my tailored dress, holding the hand of my fiancé David. He was 35, handsome and incredibly calm. Across from us sat my family, a portrait of East Coast wealth and bottomless judgment. My mother, Catherine, was already inspecting David's suit, trying to guess the designer. My father, Richard, swirled his expensive scotch, looking at David like he was a bad investment. I took a deep breath, preparing to officially introduce the man I loved to the wolves who raised me. I knew what they valued: status, money, power, and I knew exactly how this was going to play out. My father did not believe in small talk. He set his heavy crystal glass down on the white linen tablecloth with a sharp thud that made the waiter flinch. "So, David," my father began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a senior wealth manager. "Natalie tells us you work in security. What does your investment portfolio look like? Are we talking corporate risk management or private contracting?" David looked my father right in the eye, completely unfazed by the interrogation. "Actually, sir, I work the night shift," David replied, his tone polite and steady. "I handle physical security patrols and monitor camera systems. I make sure the properties I am assigned to are safe while everyone else is sleeping." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. I could hear the faint clinking of silverware from the main dining room outside our private enclave. My brother Bradley, who sat to my father's right, let out a short, mocking laugh. "Wait." Bradley leaned forward, pointing a finger. "You are a mall cop. You walk around with a flashlight and a radio." "I manage access control and surveillance networks." David corrected gently, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It is honest work." My father's face hardened, the polite facade dropping instantly. "Honest work does not pay for a lifestyle in our circle, David. Let us speak freely. What is your annual compensation?" $40,000 before taxes. Maybe a little more with overtime." David answered effortlessly. He reached for his water glass, his movements relaxed. "I earn enough to live comfortably and support myself." I could practically see the math happening in my father's head. $40,000 a year was what my father spent on his country club membership alone. To him, it was not a salary, it was spare change. "You cannot be serious," my sister Penelope chimed in, her voice shrill. She exchanged a horrified look with her husband DeAndre. DeAndre was a hedge fund manager on Wall Street, an African-American man who had climbed the financial ladder ruthlessly and loved to flaunt his massive bonuses. He was currently staring at David with thinly veiled disgust, adjusting his Rolex watch. As a professional crisis manager, my entire career was built on observing human behavior under pressure. I got paid to read a room, assess the damage, and control the narrative. Sitting there, I watched my family react exactly as I had predicted. It was fascinating to watch them unravel so quickly over something so incredibly trivial. They were not just disappointed. They were personally offended. My mother, Catherine, clutched her pearl necklace so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her face was pale beneath her perfect makeup. She looked at me as if I had dragged a stray dog into her pristine house. "Natalie," my mother gasped, her voice trembling with theatrical horror. "You are a successful executive. You went to a top-tier university. You cannot possibly be settling for the help." I kept my face entirely neutral. The urge to yell, to defend David, burned in my chest, but I knew better than to show emotion. Emotion was blood in the water to these people. Mom, I am not settling, I said calmly, my voice steady and measured. I am marrying a man who treats me with respect. His income has nothing to do with my choice. My mother pressed a manicured hand to her chest, breathing heavily to ensure everyone noticed her distress. Respect does not pay the mortgage, Natalie. How will you explain this to our friends? What will I tell the women at the club? That my daughter is marrying a door guard. It is humiliating. I watched her perform her panic, noting how she made my engagement entirely about her social standing. She did not care about my happiness. She only cared about optics. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent anchor in the storm of their toxicity. He was not intimidated by their wealth, and I was no longer a frightened child desperate for their approval. The crisis had officially begun, and I was ready to manage it. This was the moment I realized they would never change. They would always view me as an extension of their portfolio, a social asset to be managed, rather than a human being to be loved. But they had absolutely no idea just who they were dealing with right now. The thick silence at the table was suddenly broken by a booming theatrical laugh. It was DeAndre. He leaned back in his tufted leather chair, clapping his hands together as if David had just delivered a brilliantly crafted punchline. DeAndre was 32, a hyper-aggressive hedge fund manager who wore his success like a weapon. He loved reminding everyone that he had conquered Wall Street by his late 20s. Now he was looking at David with an expression of pure, unadulterated amusement mixed with heavy disdain. He found this pathetic. "Are we being pranked right now?" DeAndre asked, looking between me and my father. "Is there a hidden camera in here?" "Natalie, tell me this is a joke. You brought a guy who watches parking garage monitors to Le Soleil." "It is not a joke, DeAndre," I replied, my voice dangerously even. "David is my fiancé." DeAndre shook his head, still chuckling. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, minimalist wallet. With a flick of his wrist, he produced a crisp new $100 bill. He leaned across the table and casually tossed it directly onto David's pristine white dinner plate, right on top of his napkin. "Tell you what, man," DeAndre said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Since you are so used to being the help, why do not you make yourself useful tonight? Take this 100, go out front to the valet and fetch my Porsche. It is the black 911. Make sure you do not scratch the rims, buddy." Penelope covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. She always loved watching me being humiliated in public. My brother Bradley smirked, taking a slow sip of his scotch, as if he was watching a highly entertaining television show. My father did not intervene. He simply watched David, waiting to see how the hired help would handle being put in his place. They wanted a reaction. They wanted David to lose his temper, to yell, to prove that he lacked the refinement required to sit at their table. They wanted to justify their snobbery by forcing him into a defensive rage. They wanted an angry outburst. David did not flush with anger. He did not clench his fists or grind his teeth. He did not raise his voice or shrink back in his chair. Instead, his expression remained perfectly serene. He reached out with steady hands, picked up the $100 bill by the corner, and gently slid it back across the table until it rested next to DeAndre's wine glass. "Keep it, DeAndre," David said pleasantly. "You might need it for the parking meter later tonight." Before DeAndre could formulate a sharp comeback, I leaned forward, resting my forearms gracefully on the table. My crisis management instincts took full control over my emotions. When dealing with an aggressive, hostile party, you do not match their volume. You surgically target their vulnerabilities. "You know, DeAndre," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, clinical register, "I find your arrogance fascinating, especially given the current state of the financial sector. Wall Street hedge funds are bleeding capital right now, mostly because their digital infrastructure is entirely outdated." DeAndre scoffed, crossing his arms. "I manage a billion-dollar portfolio, Natalie. I think we are doing just fine. Are you?" I tilted my head, studying him like a specimen under a microscope. Because the latest industry reports show that mid-sized hedge funds like yours are the primary targets for international data breaches. You throw money around at dinner tables, but your firm probably cuts corners on basic network security. All it takes is one compromised server, one night shift security blind spot, and your entire billion-dollar portfolio vanishes overnight. It is ironic, really. You mock the people who guard the gates completely, forgetting that they are the only ones standing between you and total financial ruin. The smug grin on DeAndre's face vanished instantly, replaced by a tight, uncomfortable scowl. I had hit a nerve. In the corporate world, data security was the one thing that kept money managers awake at night, and I knew it perfectly well. My mother could not handle the sudden shift in power. She hated losing control. Catherine grabbed her chest, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. She fanned herself with a menu, launching into a highly choreographed panic attack. "I cannot breathe," she gasped, looking around wildly. "Richard, do something. She is ruining us. How am I supposed to show my face at the country club tomorrow? Everyone will know. They will say Catherine's daughter threw her life away on a nobody with a minimum wage job. My blood pressure is skyrocketing to dangerous levels." My father slammed his hand on the table. "Natalie, apologize to your mother and your brother-in-law immediately. This behavior is unacceptable." "I am not apologizing for defending my future husband," I said, standing up from the table. I smoothed down the front of my dress with absolute precision. "In fact, I think we are done here." I opened my clutch and pulled out my heavy metal black American Express card. I dropped it onto the center of the table. It landed with a loud, satisfying clack that silenced my mother's fake hyperventilating. "Put my meal and David's meal on this," I instructed my father. "I would hate to burden your precious country club budget." I turned to David, who had already stood up and was pulling my chair back for me like a perfect gentleman. I took his arm, feeling the solid, reassuring warmth of his presence. We did not look back as we walked out of the private dining room, leaving my family sitting in stunned, furious silence. I kept my head held high, my spine completely straight. I had just survived the opening battle, but I absolutely knew my family well. They would not let this perceived insult go unpunished. The morning sun filtered through my apartment blinds, offering deceptive peace after the disaster at Le Soleil. I sat at my kitchen island with black coffee laptop open to wedding venues. Despite the ugly confrontation, warm certainty settled over me. David and I were getting married. We did not need their approval or presence. I found a beautiful botanical garden outside the city limits. It was elegant but affordable, requiring a 20% deposit to secure the date. I grabbed the platinum debit card linked to the trust fund my late grandfather had established for me. My grandfather was the only family member who valued character over capital. He set up individual trusts for his grandchildren, intending the money for significant milestones like a wedding. Until now, I had barely touched the principal, living entirely on my salary. Today felt like the right moment to use his gift. I typed the card number into the payment portal and hit submit. A loading wheel spun for a few seconds. Then a red error message flashed across the page. "Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution." I frowned, assuming it was a fraud prevention trigger due to the large amount. I dialed the priority customer service line. A representative named Thomas answered. I provided my security details, explaining I was processing a venue deposit. I heard keyboard clacking, followed by an uncomfortable sigh. "Miss, I am looking at the account now," Thomas said apologetically. The transaction was not blocked by fraud. A hard freeze was placed on the entire trust account at 7 this morning. "A freeze," I repeated. "By whom?" "I am the beneficiary." "Yes, you are the beneficiary," Thomas replied carefully. "But the account is structured with a primary trustee who maintains administrative privileges." The freeze was initiated by the primary trustee, Richard. He cited concerns regarding the beneficiary's financial competency. I hung up slowly, staring at the blank screen. The retaliation had begun. My father had actively moved to cut off my resources. Almost exactly on cue, my cell phone vibrated on the marble countertop. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing, centering my emotions into a tight, impenetrable box before I finally swiped to answer. "Good morning, Natalie," my father said. His voice was smooth, carrying that overly calm, patronizing tone he used when negotiating hostile corporate takeovers. "I see you have already discovered the administrative hold on your grandfather's trust account." I did not raise my voice. I did not give him the satisfaction of hearing panic. "You blocked my access to my own inheritance," I stated flatly. "I am fulfilling my fiduciary duty as the primary trustee," he corrected, sounding remarkably pleased with himself. "Your grandfather entrusted me to protect those assets. After witnessing your spectacular display of poor judgment last night, I had no choice but to intervene." "You are clearly not in your right mind." "My right mind?" I asked, leaning back against the kitchen stool. "Because I refuse to let DeAndre humiliate my fiancé. Because you are planning to legally bind yourself to a man who patrols parking lots for a living," my father shot back, dropping the polite facade. "Do you honestly think I'm going to let you hand over a multi-million-dollar trust fund to a gold-digging mall cop? The moment you marry him, that money becomes vulnerable. He is targeting you for the payout, Natalie. It is textbook behavior for people of his socio-economic background." "David does not even know the trust exists," I replied coldly. "We have never discussed it." My father let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. "Please, he knows exactly what family he is trying to marry into. Listen to me very carefully, Natalie. I have frozen the accounts under a clause that allows the trustee to act if the beneficiary is deemed mentally compromised. Marrying a night shift security guard, when you have a 6-figure executive career, proves you are experiencing some sort of psychological break." He was gaslighting me, weaponizing legal jargon to force my obedience. He wanted me to feel crazy, isolated, and financially trapped. He was using the exact same tactics he used to crush rival companies. "If you end this ridiculous engagement today and apologize to your mother, I will lift the freeze," my father offered, presenting his terms like a generous king. "You can keep your job, keep your apartment, and we will pretend this embarrassing little rebellion never happened. But if you insist on dragging our family name through the mud with this nobody, you will not see a single dime of your grandfather's money." I let his threat hang in the heavy silence of the apartment. I did not cry, and I certainly did not beg. Instead, my mind accessed the financial files I had observed over the years. Mentally compromised, I echoed my voice, dripping with absolute zero temperature. "That is a fascinating legal threshold, Richard. Tell me, does being mentally compromised look anything like taking a weekend trip to Las Vegas and blowing $500,000 at the baccarat tables?" The line went dead silent. He stopped breathing, because I seemed to recall my 36-year-old brother Bradley doing exactly that. Last year, I continued, surgical and precise. "I also recall you quietly bailing your vice president out of his gambling debts by liquidating company equity to cover his tracks. Bradley literally burned $500,000 of corporate capital on playing cards, and you rewarded him with a promotion. Yet I choose to marry an honest man who works hard for his living, and I am the one being punished for seeking true love. You are a massive hypocrite, Richard. Keep the trust fund. I do not need your toxic money to build a beautiful life." I ended the call immediately. I set the phone on the counter and took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to fight back. Less than an hour after I hung up on my father, a heavy, impatient knock rattled my apartment door. I checked the peephole. It was Bradley. He stood in the hallway wearing a bespoke Italian suit, repeatedly checking his phone with an air of profound annoyance. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. He did not wait for an invitation. He pushed past me, stepping into my living room, and immediately wrinkling his nose as if the scent of my modest independence offended him. "This place gets more depressing every time I see it," Bradley announced, running a finger along the edge of my bookshelf and inspecting it for dust. "I mean, how do you even breathe in here? It is practically a closet." I closed the door, crossing my arms over my chest. "State your business, Bradley. I have work to do." He turned around, sighing heavily as he unbuttoned his jacket. "Look, Natalie, Dad is furious. Mom is having a meltdown of epic proportions, and DeAndre is demanding a formal apology. I am here to throw you a lifeline because you are clearly drowning. You need to dump the mall cop. His name is David, I said, keeping my voice level. And I am marrying him. Bradley rolled his eyes, pacing across my small rug. Do not be stupid. You are acting like a rebellious teenager trying to get back at Daddy. We get it. You made your point. But the joke has run its course. You cannot seriously intend to walk down the aisle with a guy whose career peak is holding a flashlight and asking for identification. It is embarrassing for all of us. He stopped pacing and looked at me with what he probably thought was a comforting expression. Here is the deal. Dad sent me to negotiate. You call DeAndre, tell him you overreacted, and apologize for the little stunt you pulled at the restaurant. Then you quietly break off this ridiculous engagement. If you do that, Dad will unfreeze your trust fund, and Mom will stop acting like she needs a defibrillator. We will welcome you back into the fold. We can even set you up with someone from the firm, a real man. Someone with an actual portfolio. I stared at my older brother, marveling at the sheer unadulterated delusion it took to deliver that speech. He genuinely believed he was saving me. He actually thought that returning to their toxic ecosystem of conditional love and financial manipulation was a prize worth crawling back for. You want me to apologize to DeAndre, I clarified, making sure I had heard the absolute absurdity of his terms correctly. The man who threw money at my fiancée like a stray dog. DeAndre was making a joke, Bradley countered dismissively. Your guy lacked the class to roll with it. It was an arrogant display of insecurity, I replied. I stepped forward, invading his personal space, bringing my years of corporate crisis management right to his doorstep. I did not raise my voice. I lowered it, stripping away any trace of sibling warmth. Let me make something abundantly clear to you, Bradley. I said, my tone sharp and clinical. You are standing in my home, breathing my air and insulting the man I love. You do not have the moral high ground here. In fact, you have zero leverage. If you ever show up at my door uninvited again, I will not just slam it in your face. I will personally initiate a comprehensive external forensic audit of your division at the firm. The smugness instantly evaporated from his face. His jaw went slack. That is right. I continued, watching the panic flash in his eyes. Dad might have quietly liquidated company assets to cover your $500,000 Vegas bender, but he did a sloppy job of burying the paper trail. I know exactly which dummy accounts he used to balance the ledger. If you or anyone else in this family tries to sabotage my life, my wedding, or my future husband, I will anonymously leak those financial discrepancies to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Do you understand what that means for your pristine portfolio? Bradley turned a sickly shade of pale. His hands actually trembled as he quickly buttoned his suit jacket, suddenly desperate to escape the apartment he had just mocked. You are a psychotic witch! Bradley spat, his voice shaking with undisguised rage. I am a woman enforcing a boundary, I corrected, opening the front door and pointing to the hallway. Get out. Bradley stormed past me, cursing. I slammed the door shut and locked the deadbolt. A few hours later, the familiar turn of a key in the lock signaled David's arrival. He walked in wearing his dark tactical uniform, looking exhausted, but undeniably handsome after finishing a long shift. He set his heavy gear bag down and immediately noticed my tense posture on the sofa. Without a word, he crossed the room, sat beside me, and pulled me into a warm, protective embrace. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady, calming rhythm of his heartbeat. I am so sorry about my family, I whispered, fighting back a wave of emotional exhaustion. They froze my trust fund today. My brother came over and demanded I leave you. They are extremely toxic, and I hate that I dragged you into this mess. David kissed the top of my head, his strong arms wrapping tighter around my shoulders. He did not look worried or intimidated by the financial warfare my father had just initiated. Instead, a slow, cryptic smile spread across his face, his eyes gleaming with a quiet, hidden confidence. Let them keep their money, David said softly, his voice rumbling with absolute certainty. I promise you, Natalie, money will never be an issue for us. The next morning, the sterile fluorescent lights of my office provided a stark contrast to the warmth of my apartment. I arrived at my desk early, diving into a brand management strategy for a corporate client navigating a minor public relations scandal. Work had always been my sanctuary, a place where logic reigned and emotional manipulation held no power. The illusion of safety shattered precisely at 10 o'clock when my desk phone rang. It was the executive assistant to our CEO, Harrison. He requested my presence in his office immediately. I grabbed my notepad and walked down the glass-walled corridor, expecting to discuss the quarterly metrics. Instead, I found Harrison sitting behind his massive oak desk, his expression troubled. He gestured for me to close the door and sit. Natalie, Harrison began, his tone uncharacteristically heavy. I received a very disturbing phone call this morning on my private line. It was from your sister Penelope. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Penelope was 30 years old, a woman who spent her days lunching at country clubs and orchestrating social drama. She had no business calling my employer. I kept my posture straight and waited for him to continue. She was highly distressed, Harrison said, watching me closely. She claimed you are currently experiencing a severe psychological breakdown. According to her, you have become entangled with a dangerous manipulative grifter who is isolating you from your family and draining your financial resources. She told me you have been exhibiting erratic behavior, making reckless decisions, and acting out of character. I did not interrupt. I let the sheer audacity of Penelope's lies fill the quiet room. Penelope was practically in tears, Harrison added, leaning forward. She begged me to intervene. She suggested we place you on mandatory administrative leave, claiming your current mental instability poses a massive security risk to our firm and our clients' confidential data. She insisted you need immediate psychiatric evaluation before causing irreparable damage to your career and company reputation. The sheer malice of my sister's tactic hit me like a physical blow. This was an active, coordinated strike against my livelihood. I took a slow, calculated breath. I felt a surge of pure fury, but I ruthlessly shoved it down. As a crisis manager, I knew exactly how to neutralize a smear campaign. You never respond to hysteria with more hysteria. You respond with cold, indisputable facts. Harrison. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention directly, I said, my voice projecting absolute professional calm. I understand why such a call would be alarming. However, I can assure you with complete certainty that every word my sister said is a fabricated lie. I opened my notepad not to read, but as a prop to assert control over the narrative. What you experienced this morning was a textbook character assassination attempt driven by narcissistic family dynamics. Recently, I became engaged to a man who works as a night shift security guard. Because he does not meet my family's rigid, elitist socioeconomic standards, they decided to launch a coordinated campaign to force me to break off the engagement. Yesterday, my father unlawfully froze my grandfather's trust fund. Today, my sister is attempting to orchestrate my termination. Harrison listened intently, the lines of concern on his forehead smoothing out as my clinical delivery contrasted sharply with the hysterical picture Penelope painted. I am not experiencing a mental breakdown. I continued, holding his gaze with unwavering confidence. I am simply enforcing personal boundaries against a highly toxic family system. If you look at my performance metrics over the past month, you will see I just closed 2 major accounts and successfully mitigated a massive press crisis for our top client. My cognitive functions are perfectly intact. My decision-making is sound, and my dedication to this firm remains my top professional priority. My sister's goal was to make you question my stability, so I would lose my income, forcing me to become financially dependent on my family again. It is a classic isolation tactic. I paused, letting the strategic breakdown of Penelope's psychological warfare sink in. I am fully prepared to undergo any professional evaluation you deem necessary. But I ask that you judge me on the measurable quality of my work, not the malicious gossip of an estranged relative who is actively trying to sabotage my independence. Harrison sat back in his chair, exhaling a long breath. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a mutual professional understanding. He built his agency by recognizing competence, and he knew I was one of his best assets. "I do not need an evaluation," Natalie Harrison said firmly. "Your track record speaks for itself, and your response right now tells me everything I need to know. I apologize that your family is putting you through this. This firm stands by you. If your sister calls again, my assistant has strict instructions to block the number. Your job is entirely safe." "Thank you, Harrison," I replied smoothly. I stood up, offered a polite nod, and exited the executive suite. As I walked back down the glass corridor toward my desk, the reality of the situation settled over me with a chilling weight. The initial shock faded, leaving behind razor-sharp clarity. My family was not merely throwing a tantrum over my engagement. They were not just cutting off my access to luxury or inheritance. They were actively, methodically trying to destroy my entire existence. By targeting my career, they were trying to rip away my only source of independent income. They wanted me destitute, unemployable, and thoroughly humiliated. They wanted to break my spirit completely, so I would have no choice but to crawl back to them on my knees, begging for financial mercy, ready to discard the man I loved just to survive. The stakes had fundamentally shifted. This was no longer just a toxic family disagreement. This was a war for my basic survival, and I realized I had to prepare for their next strike. 2 days after the failed corporate sabotage, my cell phone vibrated with a text from my mother. The message was uncharacteristically brief and lacked her usual demanding tone. She claimed she wanted to apologize for how things had escalated. She asked if we could meet for a private lunch at the Oak Ridge Country Club to discuss a truce. My instincts screamed that it was a trap. Narcissists do not offer truces unless they have reloaded their weapons. However, avoiding the meeting would only give them ammunition to call me cowardly or unreasonable. I needed to see exactly what their next move was so I could prepare for it. I dressed in a sharp beige suit, projecting the image of a woman strictly on business. When I arrived at the sprawling clubhouse, the host escorted me to a secluded patio overlooking the 18th hole. It was supposed to be a private lunch for two. Instead, I walked out onto the sunlit terrace to find a full tribunal waiting for me. My mother sat at the head of a wrought iron table sipping a mimosa. My father was slouched in the chair to her right, aggressively typing on his phone. Across from them sat my sister Penelope and her husband DeAndre, both wearing matching expressions of supreme arrogance. There was no truce. This was a calculated ambush on their home turf. I did not turn around and leave. I pulled out the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down, keeping my posture rigid and my face completely impassive. I placed my handbag on the table and looked directly at my mother. "You said this was a private lunch to discuss an apology," I stated clearly, letting my eyes sweep over the unwelcome audience. "Yet you brought the entire board of directors." My mother adjusted her designer sunglasses, not looking the least bit guilty for the deception. "We are a family, Natalie," she replied smoothly. "When one of us is in crisis, we all step in to help. We are here because we love you very deeply." Penelope leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "We just want to protect you from making a huge mistake," she added. "You are extremely vulnerable to dangerous scams." I glared at her sharply across the table. "Your definition of protection is highly unconventional, Penelope," I said quite coldly right now. DeAndre scoffed, crossing his arms over his expensive tailored shirt. He leaned back and stared at me as if I were a particularly foolish child. "We are not here to argue with you, Natalie," DeAndre announced, taking control of the conversation with his usual overbearing confidence. "We are here to present you with hard, undeniable facts about the man you are planning to marry. You think you know him, but you are completely blind to reality." He reached into his leather briefcase, resting on the chair beside him. With a theatrical flourish, he pulled out a thick stack of printed papers, stapled together at the corner. He tossed the packet across the glass table. It landed directly in front of me with a heavy smack. "Go ahead, read it." DeAndre ordered, a smug grin spreading across his face. I used my Wall Street intelligence resources to run a comprehensive background check on your precious night shift security guard. It turns out your devoted fiancé is a convicted felon. My mother let out a dramatic gasp, pressing a hand to her chest, as if the revelation physically pained her. My father finally put his phone down and looked up, his expression grim and victorious. Penelope nodded solemnly, pretending to look devastated on my behalf. I looked down at the first page of the document. The header boldly proclaimed it was a comprehensive criminal background report. The subject name listed at the top was David. Right below the name, highlighted in bright yellow marker, was a detailed criminal history section. It listed 2 counts of grand larceny, a conviction for felony fraud, and a brief stint in a state penitentiary 7 years ago. The sheer audacity of the document was staggering. You are about to hand over your grandfather's multi-million-dollar trust fund to a professional thief, DeAndre stated, leaning forward to ensure I felt the full weight of his supposed revelation. He is a dangerous grifter, Natalie. He targeted you because you have money and a respected family name. He is using you as his ultimate payout. I did not gasp. I did not break down in tears. I did not look at my family with shattered illusions. I kept my face entirely blank, my pulse steady and my breathing calm. I slowly reached out and picked up the printed report, holding it up to the sunlight to examine it. I scanned the personal details printed beneath the glaring yellow highlight. Wall Street intelligence resources. I repeated, allowing a small, humored smile to touch my lips. DeAndre, you literally went to a cheap public background check website and paid $20 to search his first and last name. My sister's husband frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his wrought iron chair. The records are certified, he insisted defensively. You cannot argue with state documents. Actually, I can, I replied, tossing the packet back onto the table. It slid to a stop right in front of my father. First of all, David's middle initial is Alexander. The man on this document has the middle initial Eugene. Secondly, David was born in California. This man was born and convicted in Ohio. You found a completely different person with a very common name and brought it here to terrorize me. You did not even bother to verify the date of birth before orchestrating this pathetic little intervention. The entire table fell into a stunned, deafening silence. DeAndre stared down at the printed paper, his mouth hanging slightly open right now. I stood up slowly, adjusting my beige suit jacket, with complete and absolute professional calm. I leaned forward, placing both of my hands flat against the cool glass surface of the table. I looked at each of them in turn, ensuring my gaze met theirs with unwavering intensity. The country club chatter around us seemed to fade into a dull, meaningless hum. I did not raise my voice, but the sharp clarity of my words cut through the warm afternoon air like a newly sharpened blade. You have spent your entire lives accumulating wealth. I began, keeping my tone perfectly measured. You have built portfolios, bought massive estates, and joined exclusive clubs to prove to the world that you are better than everyone else. But your money has completely rotted your morals to the core. You have become so obsessed with status and financial leverage that you have forgotten how to be decent human beings. You look at a hardworking man like David, and you see a disposable servant, someone you can mock and throw crumpled bills at just to inflate your own fragile egos. You assume that because he wears a uniform and works the night shift, he is somehow beneath your basic respect. You tried to freeze my inheritance, assuming I would panic and obey you immediately. You tried to sabotage my professional career, hoping my boss would fire me and leave me totally destitute. And now you bring me a fake $20 background check to accuse the man I love of being a convicted felon. This is not protection. This is a pathetic, desperate attempt to maintain your suffocating control over my life. You are absolutely terrified that I have found true happiness outside of your toxic, shallow ecosystem. I watched my father grip the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning stark white. Penelope refused to meet my eyes, suddenly finding her untouched mimosa incredibly fascinating. I reached into my handbag and pulled out 4 thick cream-colored envelopes. I had ordered them specially for this exact moment. I tossed them onto the center of the table, right on top of DeAndre's fake background report. "Those are your formal invitations to my wedding," I stated, standing up straight again and looking down at them with absolute finality. "David and I are getting married next month. I am handing these to you today as a final courtesy, a last opportunity for you to act like a real family. But let me make this crystal clear. If you do not show up to support me on my wedding day, you are dead to me. There will be no second chances, no holiday reconciliations, and no future relationship of any kind. You either arrive at the ceremony and treat my husband with the absolute respect he deserves, or you lose your daughter and sister permanently. The choice is entirely yours right now. I want you to understand. You should make it very carefully. This is the final line drawn in the sand between us forever. I will not tolerate your relentless games." My mother shot out of her chair, her face contorted with a mixture of sheer outrage and dramatic disbelief. She knocked her designer sunglasses onto the patio floor, ignoring them completely, as she pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You ungrateful, wretched girl," Catherine shrieked, no longer caring who at the country club was watching us. "After everything this family has given you, you dare to issue ultimatums to us over a poverty-stricken security guard. You are choosing a literal nobody over the people who gave you life and social standing. If you walk out that door and marry that man, you are no longer my daughter. I am officially disowning you right here and now. Do not expect a dime from us, and do not dare call me when he eventually robs you blind and leaves you in the gutter." DeAndre leaned back in his chair and let out a loud, obnoxious bark of laughter. He grabbed his glass of expensive imported sparkling water and raised it toward me in a mocking toast. "Wow, Natalie, what a spectacular performance!" DeAndre sneered, his eyes filled with absolute malice. "You really showed us. Good luck paying for your pathetic little ceremony without Daddy's credit cards. Go ahead and marry your minimum wage hero. I am sure the two of you will be incredibly happy serving cheap hot dogs on paper plates. I hope you truly enjoy your trashy, budget-friendly trailer park wedding. It is exactly what you deserve for turning your back on real success." My father remained completely silent, staring straight ahead with cold indifference. He simply crossed his arms tightly, allowing my mother and brother-in-law to deliver the final killing blows to our family bond. I realized then that they were entirely beyond saving. I did not say another word to them. I picked up my heavy designer handbag from the glass table, turned around, and walked away from the patio forever. I strode through the opulent country club lobby, ignoring the curious stares of wealthy patrons who had undoubtedly overheard the shouting. As I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun and walked toward my car, a profound, crushing sense of grief briefly washed over me. I was mourning the supportive, loving family I always wished I had, but never truly possessed. Yet within moments, that heavy sorrow was entirely replaced by an overwhelming wave of ultimate liberation. I was finally free. I sat inside my car, firmly locked the doors, and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my contacts list and methodically selected my mother, my father, Penelope, and DeAndre. One by one, I tapped the block caller option. I severed their access to my life completely and unconditionally. I started the engine, shifting the car into gear, with a renewed sense of absolute purpose. They had made their brutal choice, and I had made mine. I was going to marry David, and nothing in this world would ever stop us now. That evening, the atmosphere in my apartment was completely transformed. The heavy, suffocating dread of dealing with my family was gone, replaced by a light, airy sense of freedom. David and I sat cross-legged on my living room rug, surrounded by scattered bridal magazines, printouts of budget spreadsheets, and half-empty coffee mugs. We were planning a wedding on a dime, relying entirely on my personal savings account. With my grandfather's trust fund illegally frozen by my father, we had to be incredibly strategic about every single dollar we spent. David offered to contribute his savings, smiling that same calm, reassuring smile, but I insisted we keep his money tucked away for our future together. I wanted to pay for this ceremony myself to prove that my family's financial hostage tactics had completely failed. We spent hours comparing affordable locations, crossing off anything that required a massive minimum spend or preferred vendor lists. After calling dozens of places, I finally found a hidden gem. It was a rustic, beautifully maintained lakeside restaurant located just an hour outside the city. The property featured a sweeping wooden deck that overlooked the water, surrounded by ancient weeping willows that provided a natural, breathtaking canopy. It perfectly aligned with our new budget. I called the owner, Thomas, and secured our date. I immediately wired a non-refundable deposit of $5,000 from my personal checking account. It was a huge chunk of my liquid assets, but as David hugged me, I knew it was worth every single penny. We had our venue, we had our date. We were building a wedding that belonged entirely to us, completely free from the toxic, controlling grip of my parents. The vision of exchanging vows by the lake felt like an absolute dream coming true. We spent the rest of the night finalizing our small guest list and catering options. David suggested a simple menu, something warm and welcoming that fit the rustic vibe of the lake. I agreed completely, feeling a profound sense of joy that we were making these decisions together as a team. We did not need a $50,000 floral budget or an ice sculpture to validate our love. We just needed each other and a beautiful place to say our vows. For the next month, everything proceeded smoothly. I bought a simple but elegant dress online, and David ordered a sharp classic suit. We were exactly 2 weeks away from our wedding day when my cell phone rang while I was sitting at my office desk. The caller identification showed the name of the lakeside restaurant. I answered with a bright, cheerful greeting, expecting Thomas to ask about our final headcount or menu selections. Instead, I heard a heavy, nervous sigh on the other end of the line. Natalie, Thomas began, his voice stammering slightly. He sounded incredibly tense, clearing his throat multiple times before continuing. I am calling to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies. I have some terrible news regarding your reservation. My crisis management instincts instantly flared to life. My posture straightened and I grabbed a pen. What is the issue, Thomas? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. There has been a massive scheduling error. Thomas explained, his words rushing out in a panicked blur. We experienced a glitch in our booking software, an unforeseen double booking error. It turns out another party had already secured the entire property for the exact same date and time. Since they paid in full months ago, I have absolutely no choice but to honor their contract. I have to cancel your event, Natalie. I am so incredibly sorry for this massive inconvenience so close to your big day. I stopped writing. A double booking error. A software glitch. My professional brain immediately rejected his flimsy narrative. Small family-owned restaurants do not use complex automated booking software for private events. They use written contracts and physical calendars. Furthermore, Thomas had personally confirmed our date and enthusiastically processed my $5,000 deposit just a month prior. I understand mistakes happen, Thomas, I replied, my tone shifting from friendly bride to corporate interrogator. However, we signed a binding contract. I paid a non-refundable deposit to secure that specific date. You cannot simply cancel a legally binding agreement 2 weeks before the event without facing severe financial penalties. I am refunding your deposit immediately, plus an extra $1,000 for your trouble. Thomas pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. Please, Natalie. My hands are completely tied. The other party is extremely wealthy and very aggressive. They threatened to destroy my business if I did not honor their reservation. I cannot afford to fight them. I have sent the refund to your account. I am hanging up now. I am so sorry. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, staring at the blank wall of my office. Thomas was terrified. He was not dealing with a software glitch. He was dealing with a hostile takeover. My crisis management instincts completely took over, shutting down my emotional panic and replacing it with cold, analytical focus. I needed facts. I opened my internet browser and navigated to the restaurant's public social media pages and event calendars. I cross-referenced local event planners in the area, looking for any public permits or vendor schedules filed for that specific date at that specific address. It took me less than 20 minutes to uncover the brutal truth. A luxury event planner had just posted a cryptic update about securing a stunning lakeside venue for a last-minute ultra-exclusive anniversary party. I dug into the planner's public client list and found the names attached to the booking. My blood ran cold, though I was not entirely surprised by the sheer malice of this revelation. The wealthy clients who had bullied Thomas the party, who had bought out my wedding venue just to completely ruin my special day, were none other than Penelope and DeAndre. I shoved my phone into my pocket, grabbed my car keys, and marched straight out of my office building. My blood was boiling, but my mind was operating with terrifying clarity. I navigated the midday traffic with a singular focus, driving directly to my parents' sprawling estate in the upscale suburbs. I knew exactly where to find them. The front door was unlocked, as it usually was during the day when the housekeeping staff was bustling around the property. I stepped into the grand foyer, the echo of my heels hitting the imported Italian marble floors announcing my arrival. I did not bother calling out a greeting. I followed the sound of clinking porcelain and soft melodic laughter echoing from the formal sunroom at the back of the house. I walked through the double mahogany doors and stopped in the threshold. The room was bathed in bright afternoon sunlight, highlighting the ridiculous extravagance of the scene unfolding before me. My mother Catherine and my sister Penelope were sitting on the plush velvet sofas, sipping champagne. Spread across the massive glass coffee table between them were dozens of glossy floral arrangement catalogs and actual physical samples of rare imported orchids. They were pointing at different centerpieces, completely absorbed in their luxurious little world. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. In fact, Penelope casually took a sip from her crystal flute and offered me a sickeningly sweet smile, as if she had been waiting for my arrival all morning. She adjusted her designer blouse and crossed her legs, looking like a cat who had just swallowed a canary. My mother barely glanced up from a glossy photograph of white hydrangeas. She simply waved a manicured hand in the air, dismissing my intense posture as if I were a mild annoyance disrupting her important afternoon schedule. I stood there taking in the sheer volume of expensive flowers they were evaluating, and felt a cold, hard knot of absolute disgust settle deep in my stomach. The contrast between my frantic search for an affordable wedding venue and their casual display of unlimited wealth was not accidental. It was a perfectly orchestrated performance designed to humiliate me. I walked slowly toward the glass table, my eyes locked entirely on my sister, refusing to let my gaze waver for even a single second. I demanded an explanation right then and there. "I understand you recently booked a lakeside restaurant for an event 2 weeks from now," I stated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and tightly controlled. "You bullied a small business owner into breaking a legally binding contract just to steal the venue I had reserved for my wedding." Penelope set her champagne flute down on a silver coaster, completely unfazed by my direct accusation. She leaned back against the velvet cushions, looking utterly pleased with herself. "Do not be so dramatic, Natalie," Penelope said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We did not steal anything from you. DeAndre and I simply decided we needed to host an early anniversary party for our friends. Our actual anniversary is not until autumn, but the weather is just so gorgeous right now. We wanted a rustic outdoor aesthetic for the celebration. When we found out you had booked that charming little lakeside place, we realized it was the perfect aesthetic for our needs. You know how hard it is to find a venue on such short notice." I stared at her, marveling at the pure, unadulterated malice radiating from her smile. "You deliberately targeted the exact date and location of my wedding," I replied, my tone icy. "You threatened the owner to cancel my reservation." Penelope let out a high-pitched musical laugh that grated against my ears. "Oh, we did not have to threaten anyone," she corrected cheerfully. "Money talks much louder than threats. DeAndre simply called the restaurant owner and offered to pay triple the amount of your pathetic little deposit. We bought out the entire property for the whole weekend." The owner was practically begging to cancel your event once he saw the wire transfer. It is just basic economics. He recognized that catering to our social circle would bring his humble establishment significantly more prestige and future business than hosting a budget wedding for a night shift parking attendant. You cannot blame the man for wanting to elevate his clientele. My mother nodded in agreement, finally looking up from her floral catalogs. Your sister is entirely correct, Catherine added, adjusting her diamond earrings. It is a free market. If you wanted to secure the venue, you should have outbid them. But of course, you do not have the financial resources for that anymore, do you? Not since you decided to throw your life away. I looked between the two of them, processing the sheer depth of their cruelty. They had spent tens of thousands of dollars for the sole purpose of ruining my wedding day. They were looking at me with eager anticipation, waiting for me to break down, waiting for the tears, the screaming, the desperate begging that would finally prove they had won. My mother picked up her champagne flute and took a slow, elegant sip before delivering her final calculated blow. "You can glare at us all you want, Natalie," Catherine said, her voice dripping with absolute mockery. "But there is nothing you can do about it. Your security guard cannot afford to sue them for breach of contract. He does not have the retainer fee for a decent lawyer. Just go get married in a public park. It is completely free, it requires no deposit whatsoever, and frankly, it suits his tax bracket perfectly. I am sure you two will look lovely exchanging vows next to the swing sets and the dirty public restrooms." Penelope laughed again, raising her glass to clink against my mother's flute in a celebratory toast to my apparent destruction and utter financial ruin. I stood in total silence, absorbing their horrific, joyful malice. I let the silence stretch out, allowing the sharp clink of their champagne glasses to echo in the vast sunroom. They were waiting for the breakdown. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to beg them to reconsider, or to curse them for ruining the most important day of my life. Instead, my facial muscles relaxed completely. The anger that had been boiling in my veins instantly froze into something cold, heavy, and absolutely unshakable. I looked at my mother and my sister with dead, emotionless eyes. I did not blink. I did not shift my weight. I just stared at them until the triumphant smirks slowly began to slip from their faces. Their laughter died out, replaced by a sudden heavy awkwardness as my unbroken composure unsettled them entirely. "You have millions of dollars in the bank," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper that forced them to lean forward just to hear me. "You live in a massive mansion. You wear diamonds to drink expensive champagne on a Tuesday afternoon. And yet, looking at you both right now, I have never seen two people living in such absolute pathetic poverty." My mother opened her mouth to snap back, but I raised a single finger, silencing her instantly with the sheer authority of my posture. "Do not speak," I commanded. "You are morally bankrupt. Your entire existence revolves around tearing down your own family just to feel a fleeting second of superiority. You spent triple the cost of a venue deposit, essentially throwing away tens of thousands of dollars simply to ensure that I would not have a beautiful backdrop for my wedding day. You think this proves your massive power. It only proves your profound, hollow desperation." I looked at Penelope, whose hand was now gripping her glass so tightly, her knuckles were stark white. "You are so miserable in your own life, so terrified of being ordinary, that you had to steal my joy just to feel something real. I actually pity you." I stepped back from the glass table, breaking the intense eye contact permanently. "Enjoy your fake anniversary party at the lake. I am sure your wealthy friends will be incredibly impressed by the exquisite flowers. But you will always know exactly what it truly cost you. You traded your sister and your daughter for a rustic aesthetic." I turned around and walked straight out of the sunroom. I did not run. I took slow, deliberate, measured steps, my heels clicking rhythmically against the Italian marble floor. I walked through the massive foyer and out the front doors. I left them sitting there in a suffocating, highly awkward silence, completely stripped of the dramatic emotional victory they had paid so much money to achieve. As I drove away, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. My reflection showed a woman who had finally shed the suffocating weight of family expectations. The harsh reality of my ruined wedding plans remained. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of traffic lights and gray asphalt. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation slowly drained from my system, leaving behind a crushing wave of profound exhaustion. I parked my car, walked up the stairs, and unlocked my front door. David was already home wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, standing in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The moment he looked up and saw my face, he immediately dropped the cutting knife and crossed the room. I dropped my purse onto the floor. The iron wall of composure I had maintained at my parents' estate completely shattered. My knees buckled slightly, and David caught me wrapping his strong arms securely around my shaking shoulders. I buried my face in his chest and finally allowed myself to cry. The tears came in heavy, silent waves. I gripped his shirt, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, exhaustive cruelty of my own blood relatives. "We lost the venue," I choked out, my voice muffled against him. "Penelope and DeAndre found out where we booked. They paid the owner triple the deposit to cancel our contract and buy out the entire property for themselves. We have nowhere to get married, David." I looked up at him, my vision blurred with hot tears. I feel so defeated. I tried so hard to build something beautiful just for us, something entirely separate from their toxic world, and they still found a way to reach out and destroy it. They win. We have no location, and every other affordable place is completely booked for the season. The thought of postponing our wedding broke my heart. I had carefully planned every small detail on my personal budget, fighting desperately to ensure our special day would be perfectly ours. David did not look angry, and he certainly did not look defeated. He gently wiped the tears from my cheeks with his thumbs, his hands warm and steady. He held my face, looking directly into my eyes with that same quiet, unshakable confidence he had displayed at the disastrous engagement dinner. A soft, reassuring smile spread across his handsome face. He kissed my forehead tenderly, pulling me close again before stepping back just enough to hold my gaze. "Are you okay with changing the location?" David asked, his tone incredibly calm and remarkably gentle. I sniffled, wiping my eyes, completely confused by his serene reaction to our ruined wedding plans. "I do not understand," I replied quietly. "Where else could we possibly go on such short notice?" David smiled warmer this time, his eyes sparkling with a hidden profound certainty. "I have a friend who owes me a rather large favor," he explained smoothly. "We can use his property for the ceremony. It is a bit private and maybe a little unconventional compared to a commercial restaurant, but I promise you will absolutely love it. You just have to trust me." I nodded slowly, trusting him with my entire heart. I did not ask David for photographs of the property or the exact address. For the first time in my highly structured, hyper-organized life as a crisis manager, I surrendered control. I trusted David implicitly. If his friend had a simple backyard with a patch of green grass and folding chairs, I would gladly walk down that makeshift aisle. Marrying the man who shielded me from my family's relentless cruelty was the only detail that truly mattered. We spent the remainder of the evening drinking tea, completely ignoring the luxurious stolen lakeside venue that Penelope had paid a small fortune to secure. The next morning, I opened my laptop and canceled my appointments with the expensive florists and caterers we could no longer use. I requested refunds where possible and accepted the financial losses where I had to. Then I tackled my wedding dress. I had initially planned to visit a boutique downtown to find something modestly priced but elegant. Now I did not have the energy for a bridal salon experience without a mother or sister to share it with. Instead, I browsed an online retailer known for minimalist formal wear. I found a stunning, stark white sheath dress with long sleeves and a dramatic open back. It cost exactly $300. I ordered it with expedited shipping. When the package arrived 2 days later, I tried the dress on in my small bedroom mirror. It fit perfectly, hugging my frame with quiet sophistication. I did not need hand-sewn pearls or imported French lace to feel like a bride. I just needed the absolute certainty that I was making the right choice. David handled the remaining logistics for the new location, making quiet phone calls from the balcony while I finalized my work projects. He assured me his friend was thrilled to host us, and everything was completely taken care of. I leaned into that blind faith, allowing his calm demeanor to wash away the residual sting of my family's betrayal. We simply needed each other. Every time David looked at me, his eyes held a quiet promise that made the lost deposit feel entirely insignificant. He was my shelter, and I was entirely ready to become his wife. With the new arrangements finalized, there was one last heavy task I needed to complete. I sat at my kitchen island opening a blank email draft addressed to my mother, father, Penelope, and Bradley. Even after blocking their individual phone numbers to preserve my peace, I felt a lingering sense of moral obligation to formally invite them to the updated ceremony. It was not an act of hope. It was an act of absolute closure. I needed to know for the rest of my life that I had left the door unlocked for them one final time. If they chose not to walk through it, the burden of our fractured family would rest entirely on their shoulders, not mine. I kept the email strictly informative, stripping away any emotional language or references to our previous confrontations. I typed out the new date and the time. Because David's friend's property was highly secure and required clearance, David had arranged a private shuttle to transport our small guest list to the venue. I included the address of the downtown hotel where the shuttle would arrive for pickup. I clearly stated that the shuttle would depart precisely at noon and that guests needed to be on time to ensure entry to the private estate. I did not beg them to come. I did not mention Penelope's stolen lakeside party. I simply provided the logistical facts and hit send. Watching the email disappear into cyberspace brought a profound wave of finality. I knew my parents would never lower themselves to board a group shuttle. I knew Penelope would be too busy drinking champagne at the venue she stole from me. I knew Bradley would scoff at the idea of traveling to an undisclosed location for a security guard's wedding. They would not come. I accepted that brutal reality with open eyes, but sending the email was my final act of grace as a daughter and a sister. It was my way of officially washing my hands of their toxic legacy. I closed my laptop, feeling the last remaining threads of guilt detach from my conscience. I had done everything I could to be a part of their world, and now I was fully prepared to step into mine. Later that evening, my cell phone screen illuminated with a sudden notification. While I had blocked their personal numbers, I was still technically a member of the old family group chat. I had muted the conversation months ago, but the preview banner flashed across my locked screen. Bradley had taken a screenshot of my formal wedding email and posted it directly into the group thread. Below the image, he sent a message dripping with his usual brand of arrogant cruelty. I unlocked my phone and opened the chat out of morbid curiosity. Bradley had written a shuttle pickup at a hotel. What is this, a prison bus transporting inmates to the ceremony? I guess the mall cop could not afford to rent a venue with an actual parking lot. DeAndre immediately replied with a string of laughing emojis, adding, "They are probably getting married at a public campsite. Do not forget to pack your bug spray and paper plates." My mother chimed in last, typing, "Delete this, Bradley. We are not discussing her little project anymore. We have a real anniversary party to attend at the lake." I stared at the glowing screen, reading their malicious words one last time. They were entirely predictable, finding joy only in the mockery of others. I did not reply. I did not defend the shuttle or the venue. I simply tapped the settings icon, selected the option to leave the group chat, and permanently deleted the thread. The silence that followed was absolutely and entirely beautiful. The night before our wedding, I sat completely alone in the center of a massive king-sized bed. David had insisted on booking a luxury suite for me at a prestigious downtown hotel, wanting me to have a peaceful space to relax before the ceremony. The room was breathtaking, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline. A bottle of expensive champagne chilled in a silver bucket nearby, but the sheer size of the suite only magnified my absolute solitude. I poured myself a single glass of the sparkling wine and walked over to the closet. My simple $300 white dress hung from the wooden rack, looking small and fragile in the vast space. I reached out and brushed my fingers against the smooth fabric. In every movie and childhood fantasy, this specific night was supposed to be filled with laughter and shared anticipation. A bride was supposed to be surrounded by a buzzing hive of supportive women. Her mother should be sitting on the edge of the bed, passing down generational wisdom and pinning a delicate veil into her hair. Her sister should be pouring the champagne, making a toast to the future, and helping her steam the wrinkles out of the bridal gown. I had none of those things. The silence in the hotel room was so heavy it felt physical. I walked back to the window, sipping my drink, and watched the tiny headlights of cars navigating the streets far below. I thought about Penelope, likely surrounded by our parents and their wealthy friends at the lake right now, basking in the stolen attention. I thought about my mother, who had probably spent the evening bragging to her country club associates about her flawless family, completely erasing my existence from her narrative. The stark reality of my situation settled over my shoulders. Tomorrow I would wake up, do my own hair, apply my own makeup, and zip up my own dress. There would be no heartfelt family photos in the lobby, no father waiting to walk me down the aisle, and no tearful hugs before I stepped up to the altar. I was a bride entirely on her own. I sat down on the edge of the plush mattress and let the profound grief wash over me one final time. I was not mourning the people drinking wine at my sister's stolen venue. I was mourning the family I always wished I had. I grieved for the mother who should have loved me unconditionally instead of viewing me as a disappointing asset. I grieved for the father who should have protected me instead of weaponizing his wealth to control my choices. I mourned the sister who should have been my best friend rather than my most vicious competitor. It is a specific heartbreak to realize the people supposed to be your safe harbor are actually the storm you need to escape. But my professional instincts, honed by years of managing corporate disasters and mitigating catastrophic damage, took over. In crisis management, there is a fundamental rule when dealing with a toxic entity. You cannot negotiate with a cancer. You cannot appease it, and you certainly cannot heal it by simply wishing it were healthy tissue. When an infection threatens to destroy the entire system, the only viable solution is a clean, immediate amputation. Cutting off gangrenous relationships is not an act of cruelty. It is a mandatory act of survival. If I allowed my family to remain in my life, their venom would eventually seep into my marriage. They would try to poison David, undermine our future, and infect whatever family we chose to build together. I refused to let their generational trauma define the rest of my existence. I set my empty champagne flute on the nightstand and took a deep, cleansing breath. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was a scar fully healed and fading. Tomorrow I was marrying a man who stood firmly beside me when I had absolutely nothing to offer but myself. David saw my worth without a designer label or a country club membership. He was my chosen family, and he was worth losing every single toxic blood relative I had. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling my spine straighten with absolute unbreakable resolve. I would walk down that aisle alone, and I would do it with total pride. As I pulled back the heavy hotel duvet to finally get some sleep, the screen of my cell phone suddenly lit up on the nightstand. I had blocked my parents' numbers from calling me, but earlier I had forgotten to block my mother on a secondary messaging application we rarely used. A new message alert glowed brightly against the dark room. Against my better judgment, I reached over and tapped the screen to read the notification. It was a text from Catherine. "We are eating premium Wagyu beef at Penelope's beautiful lakefront party right now. The weather is absolutely gorgeous, and everyone who matters is here. Enjoy your cheap hot dogs with the door opener tomorrow." I stared at the message, reading the petty high school level insult my mother had taken the time to type out just to inflict a tiny bit more pain. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I actually smiled at the sheer pathetic desperation of her words. I did not type a reply. I did not block the secondary application. I simply pressed and held the power button on the side of my phone. The screen prompted me to confirm my choice. I swiped right, powering down the device entirely. The screen went black, plunging the room back into peaceful, uninterrupted silence. I slid the dead phone into the bedside drawer, closed it shut, and went to sleep, ready to start the best day of my life. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite, waking me with a gentle, natural warmth. I opened my eyes and stared at the pristine white ceiling. Today was my wedding day. There were no excited bridesmaids knocking, no caterers rushing around with breakfast platters, and no stressed wedding planners shouting into their phones. The room was perfectly quiet. I ordered a simple pot of freshly brewed dark roast coffee from room service, savoring the profound silence as I slowly began to prepare for the upcoming ceremony. I sat in front of the massive vanity mirror and unpacked my personal makeup bag. I did not hire a glamorous styling team. I applied my foundation with slow, steady hands, choosing a classic, understated look. I blended my eyeshadow, applied a soft coat of mascara, and carefully pinned my hair into a sleek, elegant chignon at the nape of my neck. I sprayed my favorite perfume, the scent grounding me in the present moment. I walked over to the closet and took out the $300 white sheath dress I had purchased online. I stepped into the garment and zipped it up myself, reaching awkwardly behind my back until the closure locked into place. I slid my feet into a pair of comfortable nude heels. I turned to face the full-length mirror standing in the corner of the suite. The woman looking back at me was completely solitary. There was no one standing over my shoulder to adjust my hem. No mother to shed a tear of pride. But as I looked at my reflection, I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. I felt an incredible, undeniable surge of strength. I looked beautiful. My posture was flawless, my shoulders thrown back and my gaze unwavering. The simplicity of my dress highlighted the absolute certainty radiating from my expression. I was stepping into my new life without any excess baggage. I grabbed my small hand-tied bouquet of white roses from the table. I took one last look around the empty, luxurious suite, took a deep breath, and walked out the door ready to meet the man I loved. David had told me a car would arrive at the front entrance of the hotel precisely at 11 o'clock to take me to the private venue. I stepped into the elevator and rode it down to the ground floor, expecting to find a standard black town car, or perhaps an upgraded rideshare vehicle waiting by the curb. I walked across the bustling hotel lobby, dodging tourists holding their luggage. As I approached the large revolving glass doors, the heavy foot traffic in the lobby suddenly thinned out. People were stopping in their tracks, pointing toward the street and whispering to one another. I stepped outside into the crisp morning air and stopped completely dead in my tracks. There was absolutely no standard town car or regular taxi waiting for me at the curb. Instead, an entire fleet of 6 armored jet-black Maybach sedans was idling ominously along the hotel driveway. The vehicles were massive, gleaming under the city sun, with deeply tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. The cars were not the most shocking part. The entire perimeter of the hotel entrance had been completely secured by a highly coordinated team of professional security personnel. There were at least a dozen men and women positioned strategically around the vehicles and the sidewalk. They were not wearing the cheap, ill-fitting uniforms of standard mall guards. They were dressed in immaculate, bespoke charcoal suits that fit perfectly over their muscular frames. Every single one of them wore a discreet communication earpiece, and their eyes constantly scanned the street and the surrounding buildings with intense tactical precision. I could clearly see the subtle telltale bulges beneath their tailored jackets, indicating they were heavily armed. The hotel valets had been pushed back, watching the display with wide, nervous eyes. Pedestrians were giving the convoy a wide berth, assuming a high-ranking government official or a visiting head of state was staying at the property. I stood frozen on the concrete stairs, clutching my small bouquet of white roses, entirely unsure of what to do. I assumed I had simply walked out at the wrong time and accidentally stumbled into a major security operation. I took a step back, planning to wait inside the lobby until the massive motorcade departed. Before I could retreat through the revolving glass doors, the lead security officer spotted me. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp features and an aura of absolute command. He immediately tapped his earpiece, murmured a quick command, and walked directly toward me. His movements were swift and highly disciplined. Two other agents immediately flanked him, forming a protective triangle as he approached the hotel steps. I braced myself, expecting him to politely ask me to clear the area for their VIP client. Instead, the man stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me, planted his feet firmly, and offered a deep, highly respectful nod. "Good morning, ma'am," the lead officer said, his deep voice carrying over the idle hum of the luxury engines. "My name is Agent Vance. I am the head of your personal security detail today. The vehicles are fully prepped and ready for your departure whenever you are. Please follow me." I stood there staring at him, utterly bewildered and completely overwhelmed by the highly surreal situation unfolding before me. I opened my mouth to explain that he had made a mistake, that I was just a bride waiting for a taxi. But Agent Vance had already turned, gesturing toward the lead Maybach. Another agent smoothly opened the heavy armored rear door, standing at attention. My mind raced with confusion, but a strange instinctual trust pushed me forward. I tightened my grip on my bouquet, walked down the stairs, and slid into the immaculate interior of the massive vehicle. The heavy armored door clicked shut, sealing me inside a cabin of absolute soundproof luxury. The rich scent of pristine leather and fresh mahogany filled the air. I settled back against the plush seat, still clutching my small bouquet of white roses. The engine hummed to life with a deep, powerful vibration that I could barely hear but could certainly feel. Smoothly and efficiently, the convoy of jet-black Maybachs pulled away from the hotel curb, merging into the busy downtown traffic in a flawless tactical formation. I watched through the deeply tinted windows as the city skyline slowly began to recede behind us. We merged onto the interstate, heading northeast. The route was unmistakable. We were driving directly toward the rugged coastal cliffs of Rhode Island. I sat in the spacious rear cabin, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. This level of coordinated transportation did not belong to a casual friend returning a favor. This was elite corporate security. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished wood console, separating the front seats from the back. The privacy partition was lowered, revealing the broad shoulders of the driver and a passenger seat agent monitoring a glowing dashboard of encrypted communication devices. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the frantic beating of my heart. "I need someone to explain what is happening right now. Where exactly are we going, and who organized this impressive motorcade?" The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. His expression remained completely professional, displaying no surprise at my confusion. He kept his hands firmly on the leather steering wheel, navigating the convoy flawlessly down the fast lane. "We are taking you to the wedding venue, ma'am," the driver replied politely. His voice was steady and respectful, echoing softly in the quiet cabin. "The boss wanted to ensure your safety and comfort today, ma'am. We are simply following his direct operational orders to the letter." I sat back against the headrest, completely stunned. The boss. He had to be talking about David. But how could my fiancé, a man who worked the night shift watching security monitors, command a fleet of armored vehicles and a team of highly trained tactical agents? My mind raced through endless possibilities, trying to reconcile the humble man I loved with the sheer extreme wealth and power currently surrounding me. I realized I had asked absolutely zero questions about the friend who was hosting our ceremony. I had placed my complete trust in David, deciding that the location did not matter as long as he was waiting at the altar. I watched the highway signs blur past my window as we crossed state lines, leaving my old life and my toxic family far behind. The mystery of the situation was completely overwhelming, but I felt no fear whatsoever. I was moving rapidly toward my extraordinary new future. The convoy slowed as we approached a dramatic coastal road winding along the breathtaking shoreline of Rhode Island. I gazed out the window, marveling at the endless expanse of the dark blue ocean crashing against the rocky cliffs below. We turned off the main public highway and approached an imposing stone wall that stretched infinitely into the surrounding dense forest. The vehicle smoothly decelerated as we arrived at a set of massive wrought iron gates, flanked by highly sophisticated security checkpoints and heavily armed tactical guards. The gates swung open automatically, recognizing the encrypted signal from our lead vehicle. We rolled through the entrance, and I gasped as the property finally came into full view. It was a breathtaking, multi-million-dollar coastal estate that looked like a royal palace plucked directly from a fairy tale. The sheer scale of the property was completely staggering. An architectural masterpiece of glass and modern stone stood proudly overlooking the cliffside, commanding the entire landscape with absolute authority. Above us, the distinct rhythmic thumping of rotor blades echoed through the crisp ocean air. I looked up through the tinted sunroof and saw two sleek black helicopters circling the airspace, maintaining a continuous aerial perimeter over the estate. We drove down a meticulously manicured driveway lined with towering ancient oak trees. The sprawling emerald lawns were flawless, looking like they belonged on the cover of an elite design magazine. As we approached the main courtyard, my jaw dropped at the spectacle parked in front of the grand entrance. The circular driveway was filled with an astonishing collection of the most exclusive luxury cars on the planet. I recognized gleaming Ferraris, sleek Aston Martins, customized Bentleys, and elegant Rolls-Royces parked in perfect diagonal symmetry. Drivers in crisp uniforms stood patiently beside their respective vehicles, chatting quietly, while waiting for their incredibly wealthy employers. This was not a modest backyard gathering hosted by a casual acquaintance. This was a summit of the absolute highest echelon of society. The convoy came to a gentle halt directly in front of the sweeping marble staircase leading up to the main doors of the mansion. The security detail immediately sprang into action. Agents stepped out of the escort vehicles, forming a secure human corridor leading from my Maybach to the grand entrance. The driver placed his vehicle into park and turned to look at me with a warm, reassuring smile. "We have arrived safely, Mom," he announced respectfully. I sat frozen, clutching my $300 dress, feeling entirely out of place in this magnificent playground of billionaires. Yet my heart swelled with an unexpected surge of profound confidence. Whatever massive secret my future husband was keeping, he had chosen to share this spectacular world with me. I took a deep breath, ready to step outside and discover the truth behind the man I loved deeply. I was stepping confidently into my entirely new, incredibly vibrant, and extremely powerful future. This magnificent, breathtaking estate was my perfect wedding destination today. Agent Vance opened my car door with a fluid motion. I stepped onto the pristine cobblestone driveway, clutching my simple white dress in its plastic garment bag. A polished estate manager greeted me with a warm smile, immediately guiding me through the towering mahogany front doors and up a sweeping double-curved staircase. I was escorted down a grand hallway adorned with museum-quality artwork until we reached a set of ornate double doors. The manager pushed them open, revealing a bridal suite that defied imagination. The room was bathed in natural sunlight pouring through massive arched windows overlooking the ocean. Inside, a top-tier styling team of 5 professionals was waiting for me. They moved with the precise, hushed efficiency of a high-fashion runway crew. But what stole the breath completely from my lungs was hanging in the absolute center of the room. It was not a simple budget-friendly garment. It was a breathtaking haute couture wedding gown. The dress was an architectural marvel of imported Italian silk and delicate hand-embroidered lace that sparkled with thousands of tiny, perfectly placed crystals. It was the kind of gown that belonged on the cover of an elite bridal magazine, radiating an aura of effortless, staggering wealth. A small, heavy cardstock envelope rested on a silver tray beside the dress. I picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside, written in David's strong, familiar handwriting, was a simple message. You deserve the world. Let me start by giving you this. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but the lead stylist gently intercepted me. We have exactly 1 hour to make you look as flawless as you deserve, Mom, she said kindly, whisking my cheap garment bag away and guiding me to a plush velvet chair. The transformation was swift and masterful. They elevated the simple hair and makeup I had done myself into absolute perfection. They pinned my hair into a sophisticated sweeping updo that felt completely secure, then applied cosmetics that made my skin glow with radiant vitality. When they finally helped me step into the haute couture gown, it fit my body with astonishing flawless precision. The silk cascaded around me like liquid light. I looked in the antique gilded mirror and barely recognized the powerful, breathtaking bride staring back. I was no longer the discarded daughter of a toxic family. I was a woman stepping into an extraordinary new reality, armed with the undeniable certainty that I was deeply, profoundly loved. The heavy wooden doors of the bridal suite swung open, and the estate manager offered me his arm. I accepted, letting him guide me out of the suite and toward the grand marble staircase that descended into the main foyer. As I took my first step, the rich, swelling melody of a live symphony orchestra drifted up from the lower level. The music was impossibly beautiful, filling the cavernous space with a sense of triumphant majesty. I walked down the sweeping stairs, my silk train gliding effortlessly behind me. The manager led me through the mansion and out onto a massive stone terrace that opened up to a spectacular cliffside altar. The ocean breeze caught the edge of my veil, and the sheer scale of the event finally hit me. Rows of elegant, transparent ghost chairs were arranged perfectly on the manicured lawn, facing the dramatic drop of the rocky cliffs and the endless blue water. But it was the people sitting in those chairs that made my professional crisis management instincts completely short-circuit. These were not regular people. As I began my slow, measured walk down the long aisle, my eyes scanned the crowd. I recognized them from the front pages of financial publications and global summit broadcasts. Sitting in the second row was the founder of a major Silicon Valley tech giant. Across the aisle sat two prominent state governors standing to honor my arrival. I spotted at least a dozen Fortune 500 CEOs, men and women, whose companies practically ran the global economy. They were dressed in impeccable designer suits and stunning couture dresses, looking at me with genuine, respectful admiration. There were no pitying glances. There was no whispered mockery. This assembly of immense global power had gathered here exclusively to witness our union. The sheer gravity of the guest list was staggering. I realized that my parents, who spent their entire miserable lives desperately trying to climb the social ladder of their pathetic country club, could not even dream of standing in the same room as the people currently turning their heads to watch me walk by. My family had mocked my fiancé, utterly blind to the fact that he apparently commanded the absolute highest echelon of American society. I kept my chin high, radiating the confidence of royalty, as I navigated the immaculate grassy aisle, moving steadily toward the man who had completely redefined my world. At the end of that magnificent aisle stood David. I felt the air leave my lungs. He was no longer dressed in his unassuming security uniform or the casual clothing he wore around my apartment. Today he was wearing a meticulously tailored custom Tom Ford tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders with devastating perfection. He looked like absolute power personified, an imposing figure commanding the unparalleled wealth and authority surrounding us. Yet as my eyes locked onto his, the intimidating billionaire facade vanished entirely. He was just my David. He stood at the cliffside altar framed by the endless expanse of the dark blue ocean, looking at me with pure, unadulterated adoration. He did not care about the tech titans or the politicians sitting in the audience. He did not care about the helicopters circling above or the fleet of armored vehicles securing the perimeter. His entire universe was focused solely on me. As I took my final steps toward him and placed my hands in his, I knew with absolute certainty I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I took David's hands, the world around us seemed to vanish, leaving only the rhythm of the crashing waves and the warmth of his skin against mine. The officiant began speaking his words, echoing softly across the cliffside, but my focus remained entirely on the man standing before me. When it was time for our vows, David did not pull out a piece of paper. He spoke directly from his heart. He promised to protect me, to value my brilliant mind, and to stand as an impenetrable wall between me and anyone who ever tried to cause me harm. My vows were equally fierce. I promised to be his calm in every crisis, his loyal partner, and his steadfast advocate. As the officiant asked for the rings, David leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. His voice was a low, intimate murmur, meant only for me. "I have a confession to make," he whispered smoothly, as he slid the heavy diamond band onto my finger. "I am not just a security guard, Natalie. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Vanguard." I stared at him, my professional crisis management brain instantly processing the magnitude of that name. Aegis Vanguard was the premier cybersecurity and private defense corporation in the world. They protected billionaires, sovereign wealth funds, and global data centers. I do undercover night shifts because it is the only way to personally test the physical security protocols of the properties my firm manages. David continued, a mischievous spark lighting up his eyes. "I like to know exactly where the blind spots are. I do not trust reports from middle management. I trust my own eyes. When your father interrogated me about my salary, I gave him the exact base pay of my entry-level guards just to see how he would react. You defended that entry-level guard with everything you had. You proved your incredible character." I smiled, a genuine laugh bubbling up in my chest. "You are a brilliant, sneaky man," I whispered back, as the officiant pronounced us husband and wife. David pulled me in for a breathtaking kiss, sealing our vows and his massive secret in one perfect cinematic moment. I was officially married to a billionaire titan. The applause that erupted from the elite crowd was deafening, completely cementing our powerful, extraordinary new reality together, right here today. As we broke our kiss and turned to face our distinguished guests, I finally noticed something highly unusual situated at the edges of the manicured lawn. Positioned strategically behind the rows of transparent ghost chairs were multiple professional camera crews. These were not standard wedding videographers hired to capture romantic moments for a family album. They operated massive broadcast-quality television cameras marked with the logos of major national news networks. Boom microphones hovered just out of frame, and producers wearing headsets were quietly directing the camera operators. I tightened my grip on David's hand, leaning closer to him as we began our walk back up the grassy aisle. "Why is the national press recording our wedding?" I asked, maintaining my radiant bridal smile for the cameras while keeping my voice pitched low. David chuckled softly, guiding me gracefully past the applauding tech billionaires and politicians. "Aegis Vanguard just signed a landmark multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity contract with the Pentagon this morning," he explained casually, as if discussing the weather. "We are officially taking over the digital infrastructure protection for the entire United States defense sector. Because I have spent the last decade operating completely under the radar, the media has aggressively dubbed me the mystery billionaire of the tech world. The Pentagon contract made my anonymity impossible to maintain any longer. When the networks found out I was getting married today, the press absolutely insisted on covering the event. They wanted the exclusive first look at the elusive chief executive officer finally stepping into the spotlight. I processed this massive revelation with my usual professional speed. "You orchestrated a national media debut on our wedding day," I noted, highly impressed by his strategic public relations maneuvering. "I agreed to grant them exclusive broadcasting rights on one strict condition," David replied, his eyes gleaming with a fiercely protective light. "They had to broadcast the ceremony live. I wanted the entire country to see exactly who I chose to stand beside me. I wanted everyone to witness the brilliant, beautiful woman who loved me when I was just a man in a cheap uniform." As we reached the grand marble staircase, the realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Our wedding was not just a private elite gathering, it was currently being broadcast live across national television networks. Millions of people were watching us right now, absolutely stunned. Meanwhile, nearly 100 miles away, the atmosphere at the stolen lakeside restaurant was decidedly less majestic. Penelope and DeAndre had successfully secured the rustic venue, but their early anniversary party was proving to be a suffocatingly dull affair. The wealthy guests they had invited were visibly bored, politely sipping their overpriced wine while frequently checking their watches. My family sat together at a prominent table near the outdoor bar, looking completely disengaged from the celebration they had spent tens of thousands of dollars to hijack. My mother, Catherine, swirling a glass of expensive Pinot Noir, sighed heavily and leaned across the table. "I cannot believe that Natalie actually went through with her ridiculous little ceremony today," she complained, shaking her head in mock pity. Bradley laughed, scrolling aimlessly on his smartphone. "She is probably cutting a grocery store sheet cake in a public park right now," he mocked, popping an appetizer into his mouth. DeAndre smirked, wrapping his arm around Penelope. "Let her enjoy her miserable life with the mall cop. We dodged a massive bullet by cutting her off permanently." They sat in their hollow arrogance, utterly blind to the monumental television broadcast, about to shatter their pathetic reality. The afternoon sun beat down on the wooden deck of the lakeside restaurant, but the atmosphere at Penelope's anniversary party remained incredibly stagnant. The hired acoustic guitarist had stopped playing 20 minutes ago, taking a much-needed break from the disinterested crowd. Guests were checking their phones under the tables, mentally calculating how soon they could politely make an exit without causing a scene. Behind the main rustic bar, the bartender let out a quiet sigh of sheer boredom. Looking for any sort of distraction to pass the time, he reached for the black plastic remote control. He pointed it directly at the massive high-definition flat-screen television mounted securely above the top-shelf liquor display. He pressed the volume button, turning the sound up significantly to drown out the dull, dragging silence of the outdoor patio. The ambient noise of clinking wine glasses and forced artificial laughter was abruptly shattered by the dramatic, booming orchestral theme music of a major national news network. The screen transitioned from a mundane commercial break to a bold, striking red and gold graphic that flashed across the display. The giant letters read, "Business Titans Special Report." The sudden, commanding noise immediately captured the attention of the wealthy guests. People stopped checking their watches and turned their heads toward the outdoor bar, starving for absolutely any form of real entertainment to break up the monotonous afternoon. Penelope let out a sharp, annoyed huff, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She glared at the bartender, furious that a television broadcast was stealing the spotlight away from her highly expensive, stolen aesthetic celebration. She opened her mouth to demand the bartender turn the television off immediately. Before she could utter a single word, DeAndre held up his hand, signaling her to remain perfectly silent. He leaned forward in his wooden chair, his eyes locking onto the bright screen with sudden, intense professional interest. This specific news channel exclusively covered massive market-moving financial updates, and as a hedge fund manager, DeAndre never ignored breaking corporate news. The sweeping graphics faded away, and the camera cut sharply to a prestigious news anchor sitting behind a sleek glass desk in a bright studio. The anchor looked straight into the camera lens, holding a stack of papers, wearing an expression of absolute, undeniable excitement. The entire restaurant patio fell completely silent, waiting for the important breaking news. "Good afternoon," the news anchor announced, his crisp, authoritative voice echoing across the quiet, rustic lakeside restaurant patio. "We are interrupting our standard programming to bring you a monumental exclusive update from the technology and defense sectors. Just hours ago, the United States Pentagon officially awarded a landmark multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity contract to Aegis Vanguard, cementing the corporation as the absolute ultimate power in global digital defense. But that is not the only historic news breaking today. For the past decade, the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Vanguard has remained completely anonymous, earning the title of the tech world's most elusive mystery billionaire. He has notoriously guarded his privacy, refusing all interviews and public appearances. Today, that unprecedented secrecy ends. The anchor smiled broadly as the studio feed transitioned. The elusive titan is finally stepping into the global spotlight, but not for a corporate press conference. He is making his grand public debut to celebrate his highly anticipated marriage. The television screen immediately split in half. On the left side, high-definition drone footage showcased a breathtaking multi-million-dollar coastal estate in Rhode Island, complete with circling security helicopters and a fleet of armored Maybachs. On the right side, the camera zoomed in to a pristine, crystal-clear live feed of a cliffside altar. Today, the anchor continued his voice, ringing with absolute excitement. Billionaire CEO David officially weds renowned corporate crisis management expert Natalie. The live broadcast cut to a stunning cinematic close-up of the couple. There, standing in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, was David looking like absolute royalty. And standing right beside him, wearing a breathtaking crystal-embroidered haute couture gown, radiating absolute power and flawless beauty, was Natalie, smiling with undeniable triumph as she looked affectionately at her powerful new husband. At the prominent table near the outdoor bar, the fabricated reality of my toxic family shattered into a million jagged pieces. My father, Richard, who had just taken a confident sip of expensive scotch, suddenly choked violently. The amber liquid spilled down his chin and stained his designer shirt as he coughed, staring at the massive television screen with an expression of absolute terror. He had frozen the trust fund of a woman who was currently marrying the single most powerful financial protector in the country. Beside him, Catherine let out a strangled gasp. Her fingers went numb, dropping her heavy silver fork directly onto her porcelain plate with a loud clatter. The color completely drained from her heavily powdered face. The daughter she had mercilessly mocked, the one she told to get married in a dirty public park, was standing on national television wearing a custom haute couture masterpiece that cost more than their entire suburban estate. Penelope slumped back in her chair, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. She looked around at her stolen lakeside venue, realizing it looked like a cheap, pathetic barn compared to the staggering multi-million-dollar oceanfront palace displayed on the news. But it was DeAndre who experienced the most agonizing realization. He sat completely paralyzed as he stared at David's face on the screen. The blood rushed to his ears, pounding loudly as sheer panic seized his chest. The man he had arrogantly mocked, the man he had tossed $100 bill at and ordered to fetch his Porsche, was the elusive founder of Aegis Vanguard. DeAndre's entire Wall Street hedge fund relied exclusively on Aegis Vanguard's digital security software to protect its portfolio. He had literally insulted the one cybersecurity titan who essentially held Wall Street's data in his hands. The live broadcast on the television screen shifted from the breathtaking aerial shots of the coastal estate to an exclusive on-the-ground interview. A prominent financial journalist holding a microphone with the network logo stood on the manicured lawn, just steps away from the cliffside altar. David and I stood together, my hand resting securely in the crook of his arm. The ocean breeze gently caught the train of my dress, creating a picture-perfect moment. The reporter smiled warmly at us, clearly thrilled to have scored the first public interview with the elusive tech billionaire. David, the reporter, began projecting her voice over the ambient sound of the crashing waves and the distant string quartet. The entire business world has been trying to unmask you for a decade. Choosing your wedding day to step into the public eye is an incredibly bold move. We see dozens of industry titans and high-ranking officials in the audience today, but many viewers are noticing a distinct absence. Where is the bride's family? Are they celebrating with you here today? I maintained my perfectly serene professional smile, though my heart beat a fierce rhythm against my ribs. I knew David was not going to offer a polite, rehearsed public relations deflection. He was going to execute a precise, calculated strike. David turned his head and stared directly into the camera lens. The warmth in his eyes completely vanished, replaced by an icy, unyielding intensity that commanded absolute authority. He looked like a man who destroyed empires before breakfast. "No, my wife's family is not here," David stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "They were unfortunately too busy attending a local barbecue. You see, when I first met them, I introduced myself simply as a night shift security guard. I wanted to see the true character of the people who raised the woman I love. They took one look at my supposed salary and immediately assumed I was entirely beneath their respect. They relentlessly mocked my wife for loving a working-class man. They tried to financially blackmail her, they attempted to sabotage her corporate career, and they went out of their way to humiliate her at every single opportunity." The reporter actually gasped, lowering the microphone slightly in sheer shock. Live television rarely featured such brutal, unfiltered honesty. "They made their choice." David continued, his tone cutting through the broadcast like shattered glass. "They chose arrogance over family. They chose status over basic human decency. They threw away a brilliant, loyal daughter because they thought she was marrying a nobody, so they are not here. And they never will be. I am taking over from here. Now I will make my wife the most powerful woman in the country, and they will have to watch her rise from the outside." David turned back to me, the ice melting from his eyes, leaving only profound devotion. He kissed my hand gently as the broadcast abruptly cut back to the stunned anchors. Back at the stolen lakeside venue, total unadulterated chaos erupted instantly. The wealthy guests, who had been pretending to enjoy the dull anniversary party, were now standing up from their wooden tables, pulling out their own smartphones to verify the staggering news breaking across social media platforms. The ambient chatter turned into a deafening roar of frantic gossip. DeAndre stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes scraping harshly against the wooden deck. His entire career flashed before his eyes. His massive hedge fund, managing billions of dollars in client assets, was anchored entirely by the impenetrable cybersecurity software provided exclusively by Aegis Vanguard. He had literally thrown a $100 bill at the man who owned the keys to his entire financial empire. If David decided to terminate their corporate contract today, DeAndre's firm would be completely vulnerable to catastrophic data breaches. He would be ruined. Richard clutched the edge of the outdoor bar, his face turning a dangerous, sickly shade of purple. The reality of his catastrophic miscalculation hit him with physical force. As a wealth manager obsessed with high-net-worth clients, he had spent his entire life begging for access to billionaires exactly like David. Instead of welcoming the ultimate financial titan into his family, he had unlawfully frozen his own daughter's trust fund and formally disowned the most powerful son-in-law in American history. Penelope began to hyperventilate, her carefully applied makeup running down her face as she realized her rustic stolen party was an absolute joke. Catherine simply sank to her knees on the wooden deck, sobbing hysterically as she watched her country club reputation instantly evaporate into nothing. Their entire high society standing was now thoroughly and completely destroyed forever in front of absolutely everyone. Hours later, David and I were enjoying our spectacular wedding reception inside the grand ballroom of the coastal estate. The crystal chandeliers glowed warmly as we drank vintage champagne, completely surrounded by genuine friends and supportive colleagues. I excused myself to use the bridal suite and decided to finally turn my smartphone back on. The device vibrated so violently in my palm that the screen completely froze for 30 seconds. When the operating system finally loaded, a staggering wave of notifications flooded the display. There were exactly 150 missed calls. The text messages were a pathetic display of frantic, groveling desperation. My mother had sent 30 texts begging for forgiveness, claiming she always knew David was a wonderful man. My father sent massive paragraphs apologizing for the trust fund misunderstanding, desperately asking to arrange a formal business meeting with his new son-in-law. Bradley sent voice notes crying about how he was just joking at my apartment. They were utterly terrified of being permanently locked out of my powerful new universe. I simply smiled, hit the physical power button to shut the cell phone down again. and happily walked back out to my magnificent new life. The morning after our wedding, the coastal Rhode Island estate was bathed in serene golden sunlight. Inside the master suite, David and I were enjoying a quiet breakfast overlooking the ocean, completely insulated from the frantic desperation brewing just beyond the property lines. However, the perimeter was entirely different. Driven by a volatile cocktail of panic, greed, and sheer terror at losing their social and financial standing, my family had piled into Richard's luxury SUV at the crack of dawn. They drove recklessly from their miserable lakeside gathering directly to the estate they had seen on national television. They believed they could simply roll up to the gates, flash a smile, and demand entry as if the insults had never happened. They expected to be greeted with open arms and immediate access to David's billions. Instead, their vehicle abruptly stopped long before they even reached the primary wrought iron gates. The entrance to the estate was heavily fortified, far beyond anything a standard country club could ever fathom. A massive barricade constructed of reinforced steel blocked the private access road. The moment Richard's SUV approached the restricted zone, a highly coordinated tactical response was triggered. Aegis Vanguard did not employ standard security personnel. They employed elite, highly trained operatives who treated every perimeter breach with absolute, uncompromising seriousness. Within seconds, 3 jet-black tactical vehicles swarmed the driveway, effectively boxing Richard's SUV in from all sides. A team of 6 heavily armed security operatives stepped out, moving with terrifying synchronized precision. They wore full tactical gear and earpieces projecting lethal competence. Their hands rested casually but firmly near their holstered weapons. The lead operative, whose sheer size commanded instant obedience, approached the driver's side window. Inside the SUV, the atmosphere of arrogant entitlement evaporated into pure suffocating panic. DeAndre, sitting in the passenger seat, shrank back against the leather upholstery, suddenly realizing that his Wall Street attitude meant absolutely nothing against a privately funded tactical defense force. Penelope clutched her designer purse, her eyes wide with genuine fear as the armed guards surrounded their vehicle. They had driven for hours expecting a reunion, but drove straight into an impenetrable fortress designed to keep toxic threats outside. Richard slowly rolled down his window, attempting to muster his usual commanding tone. He offered a strained, nervous smile to the imposing security operative. "There must be some mistake," Richard stated, his voice lacking its typical authority. "We are the family of the bride. We are here to see Natalie and David. We want to offer our congratulations to the happy couple." The lead operative did not smile back. He did not ask for their identification or consult a clipboard. He stared at Richard with cold indifference. "Turn your vehicle around immediately," the operative commanded, his voice deep and devoid of negotiation. "You are trespassing on private property. You have exactly 30 seconds to vacate the premises before we escalate our response." Catherine could not handle the rejection. The indignity pushed her over the edge. She unbuckled her seatbelt, threw open the rear door of the SUV, and stepped out onto the asphalt. "I am the mother of the bride," Catherine screamed, her voice echoing against the coastal winds. She pointed a trembling finger at the steel gates. "How dare you speak to us this way? Let me in to see my son-in-law right now. We demand to speak to David immediately." The tactical guards did not flinch. The lead operative stepped directly into Catherine's path, blocking her from taking a single step closer to the estate. "Mom, I will not repeat myself," he stated, his tone dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "You are not guests. You are designated hostiles. I have direct orders from the chief executive officer regarding your entire party. You are currently on a permanent, non-negotiable blacklist. If you do not leave this perimeter immediately, you will be physically restrained and handed over to law enforcement for trespassing." The humiliating reality finally crashed down on them. There was no negotiating. There was no manipulation. They were totally powerless. Catherine stared at the armed men, her face flushing a mortified crimson. She realized her screaming only made her look like a deranged trespasser. Defeated and thoroughly humiliated, she climbed back into the SUV. Richard quickly threw the vehicle into reverse, executing a sloppy, panicked turn. The security detail watched them closely, until the SUV sped away in utter disgrace, fleeing back to their miserable lives. Monday morning arrived with a brutal, unforgiving swiftness. The hangover from their spectacular weekend humiliation was immediately overshadowed by a massive, catastrophic corporate emergency. DeAndre walked into his towering Wall Street hedge fund office expecting to bury his weekend embarrassment in his daily work, but he suddenly found his entire trading floor in a state of absolute unmitigated panic. Sirens were practically blaring inside his head as his lead software engineers frantically typed on their keyboards, their faces pale with sheer terror. The usual roar of financial negotiations had been replaced by shouted warnings and the ringing of alarm systems. DeAndre froze in the doorway of his luxurious glass office, his expensive leather briefcase slipping from his trembling fingers and hitting the carpeted floor with a dull thud. Something was catastrophically wrong with his network. Over the weekend, a highly sophisticated international hacking syndicate had launched a massive, incredibly coordinated digital assault targeting mid-sized hedge funds across the country. DeAndre's firm had experienced a massive security breach scare. Critical firewalls were currently failing, and client data containing billions of dollars in vulnerable assets was on the verge of being completely exposed. DeAndre stared at the flashing red warning screens on his terminal, his heart hammering against his ribs. His firm desperately needed a proprietary Aegis Vanguard security patch to neutralize the imminent threat and prevent the company from collapsing entirely. Without that software update, his entire empire would be reduced to ashes before the market closed. He had to act fast. The sleek glass doors of the Aegis Vanguard headquarters in downtown Manhattan slid open, allowing the frantic sounds of the city street to briefly penetrate the immaculate, silent lobby. DeAndre stumbled through the entrance, practically hyperventilating, his usually immaculate designer suit wrinkled and soaked with nervous sweat. He was entirely desperate. The massive cybersecurity threat actively destroying his hedge fund required an immediate top-tier software patch that only this specific corporation could authorize. Behind him trailed Penelope, clutching her expensive handbag with trembling fingers, and my father Richard, whose face had aged a decade over the weekend. They had tagged along foolishly, believing that playing the estranged family card might somehow grant them emergency access to the elusive chief executive officer. They approached the imposing front reception desk, which was constructed from a solid block of polished black granite and flanked by two heavily armed tactical guards. DeAndre slammed his palms down on the cold stone, gasping for air, as he addressed the highly polished security liaison sitting behind the console. "You have to let me see David DeAndre," pleaded, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I am the manager of a billion-dollar hedge fund, and our entire server network is collapsing as we speak. We are suffering a catastrophic data breach. I need an emergency authorization for the Vanguard security patch right this second, or my firm is completely dead. Please just tell him his brother-in-law is downstairs." Richard stepped forward, attempting to summon whatever remaining scrap of authority he possessed. He smoothed his tie, offering a strained, desperate smile to the unyielding security personnel. "Yes, tell him his father-in-law Richard is here as well. We know we got off on the wrong foot at the engagement dinner, but this is a massive financial emergency. Family helps family in times of crisis. We just need 5 minutes of his time to clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding and secure our business assets." The security liaison did not even blink. He calmly adjusted his earpiece, tapped a few keys on his transparent digital interface, and looked back at the pathetic group sweating in the pristine lobby. "I am sorry, gentlemen," the liaison stated crisply. "The chief executive officer does not take unannounced walk-in appointments under any circumstances whatsoever. However, the director of corporate communications has been alerted to your presence and will handle it." A soft chime echoed through the vast lobby as the doors of the private executive elevator slid open. I stepped out, the sharp click of my designer heels immediately drawing their frantic attention. I was dressed in a perfectly tailored striking crimson power suit. I walked slowly and deliberately across the polished marble floor, flanked by two dedicated security agents, I stopped just a few feet away from my stunned, desperate family. I did not look angry. I looked at them with the savage, clinical calmness of a professional crisis manager who had completely eliminated a threat. DeAndre's jaw dropped, and Penelope shrank back, suddenly realizing they were completely at my mercy. "Good morning," I said, my voice echoing with absolute corporate authority. As the newly appointed Director of Corporate Communications for Aegis Vanguard, I handle all external crisis inquiries. I understand your hedge fund is currently experiencing a fatal vulnerability. You came here begging for our proprietary security patch to save your collapsing empire. DeAndre nodded frantically, tears of desperation welling in his eyes. "Please, Natalie," he begged, his voice trembling. "You have to help me. I will lose absolutely everything." I did not flinch. I reached into the pocket of my crimson blazer and slowly pulled out a crisp new $100 bill. I stepped forward, reaching out to DeAndre. He automatically extended his trembling, sweaty hand, completely confused by the gesture. I placed the $100 bill flat against his palm. "Go fetch my driver, DeAndre," I commanded, tossing his exact humiliating words from the engagement dinner right back into his face. "Tell him to pull the car around." Aegis Vanguard does not do business with liabilities, and we certainly do not offer protection to bankrupt bullies today, tomorrow, or ever again in this corporate lifetime. I turned my back on them and walked away, leaving them frozen in the lobby as the security guards stepped forward to forcefully escort them out of the building. By the time the stock market officially closed that afternoon, the damage was completely irreversible. Without the vital Aegis Vanguard security patch, DeAndre's hedge fund suffered a massive, catastrophic data hemorrhage. The firm entirely collapsed under the weight of the breach, filing for immediate bankruptcy before the week was over. Because my father had heavily leveraged his own wealth management clients into DeAndre's fund, Richard's firm suffered staggering, unrecoverable financial losses. Their pristine country club reputation evaporated overnight, replaced by scandalous headlines, massive lawsuits, and absolute social ruin. Penelope and DeAndre were forced to sell their luxury assets just to cover their soaring legal fees, tumbling violently down the socio-economic ladder they once worshipped. Later that evening, I stood on the sweeping glass balcony of my new Manhattan penthouse, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne. The city lights glittered below me, a vibrant, endless ocean of brilliant possibilities. David wrapped his strong arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin gently on my shoulder. I leaned back into his warm, protective embrace, breathing in the crisp night air. I felt no guilt, no remorse, and absolutely no sorrow for the people who had tried to destroy me. I finally understood that cutting off toxic bloodlines was never a tragic loss. It was simply the necessary clearing of rotten debris, making room for the magnificent empire I was always meant to build. I raised my glass to the bright city skyline, completely at peace, deeply loved, and entirely, wonderfully, absolutely free from the burdens of my past life forever, and ready to embrace my extraordinary, incredibly powerful new future today. The story of Natalie and David offers a powerful exploration of self-worth and the courage required to enforce absolute boundaries. The most profound lesson to draw from this narrative is that your value is not defined by the people who refuse to see it, even if those people are your own blood relatives. For years, Natalie's family measured human worth entirely by superficial metrics, like job titles, bank account balances, and country club status. They weaponized their wealth to manipulate, isolate, and humiliate her simply because she chose authentic love over their shallow elitism. Natalie's journey teaches us that cutting ties with toxic family members is not an act of cruelty or petty revenge. Instead, it is a mandatory act of emotional survival. When an environment demands that you shrink yourself, abandon your values, or tolerate disrespect. To earn conditional love, walking away becomes the ultimate victory. By refusing to engage in their hysterical drama and stripping away their financial leverage, Natalie reclaimed her power. She proved that true wealth lies in personal integrity, resilience, and the family you actively choose to build. Her unwavering composure under extreme pressure serves as a masterclass in crisis management applied to personal life. We cannot control the malice or the sheer arrogance of others, but we hold absolute control over our reactions and our boundaries. Natalie did not need David's secret billionaire status to validate her choices. She had already won the moment she chose her own peace over their toxic legacy. Ultimately, removing harmful individuals from your life is just clearing the necessary space for your true happiness to grow. If you are currently sacrificing your mental health to please people who continuously disrespect you, take a step back today and start building the boundaries you need to finally reclaim your peace.